Do you want to live more sustainably but aren't sure where to start or how it fits in with your everyday living? The ReNewy Living Podcast simplifies sustainability so you can feel confident to take small, meaningful actions that fit into your lifestyle. Based on the lands of the Awabakal and Worimi people in Newcastle, Australia, you'll learn how to live lighter on our planet through practical ideas, stories from like-minded people, and examples of businesses doing great things. With an open heart and mind, join me, Mardi Lee, as we explore how to consume less, build stronger community connections, and thrive in your neighbourhood, wherever you call home. Welcome to the ReNewy Living Podcast. Hello, I'm Mardi Lee, and welcome to the ReNewy Living Podcast. Renovating your home is exciting, but it can also be overwhelming, especially when you're trying to make sustainable short and long-term choices. Is it possible to create your dream design without having a massive environmental footprint? That's exactly what we're talking about with my guest, Natalie Van de Merwe from On Home Ground. Natalie is an architect who specialises in renovations over new builds to help suburban homeowners create eco-effective homes that work for them and the planet. If you're ready to rethink the way you renovate, enjoy listening to our conversation. G'day, Natalie.
G'day, Mardi. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. This is the first time having an architect on the podcast.
That's very exciting. I hope it's the start of something great.
Well, let's get stuck into it then. Natalie, you say that your architectural style is to help people become more eco-efficient in their homes. What does it really mean when we say eco-efficient homes?
Yeah, so I guess, for a little while now, the term sustainability has been banded around and almost to the point now where it's a little bit greenwashy and it's lost a little bit of its potency. And having a look at what does it actually mean to be sustainable, you can't really measure a home's true eco-effectiveness without understanding the human context. You can measure the carbon footprint of materials, the construction methods, and that gives us a big part of the story. But a home without people, doesn't really have a purpose. So to be truly eco-efficient, we have to look at what's sustainable and effective for the people living in that home, which is a much more nuanced and complex, equation. What might be effective now might not be appropriate in the future, et cetera, et cetera.
Putting it in that perspective is really great because it's very easy to look at materials as being sustainable because they're very tangible. But people are the, how do you say it? You can't say that they're necessarily the intangible, but they're the important part of being and living in a home.
Yes, absolutely. If we look at the home as a machine, the people are the ones essentially pushing the buttons. We're opening the windows, we're turning on the aircon. And so, to push the sustainability credentials back on just the home, that's not really fair, is it?
No, you've made a really good point there. It isn't fair. And I think that's where you as an architect comes in to home design, to talk to clients or to talk to homeowners about what they actually see and how they actually use their home.
Yes, a big part of it is, talking to people about what they do in their life, what they, a lot of people come with aspirations of what they want to do once their project's complete. So, how do you get there? How do you make those changes if you're looking to change your lifestyle? Some of those things often start before the renovations even happened because they're human changes.
When someone comes to you with an idea for a house design, where do you start?
That's a great question. So for a lot of people, it's a really daunting sort of place to be on the precipice of a big project, whether it's a new build or a renovation. And that can be really daunting. So a lot of people, a lot of clients, they don't have a lot of experience with, the design process or the planning process or the building process. So a big part of what we do at On Home Ground is starting that conversation really early on about, what the values are for the people living in that home, regardless of size or how often people are there. What values do they currently, use in their life? What values do they want to see when they finish their project? And really getting down into, what's behind the want list, what's behind the need list even, is really powerful. And that enables people, once you've got those values, you can use those values throughout the whole project and long after to help you make decisions, to help guide you. It's a little bit like a contract with yourself. So that, you might get to a really challenging decision later on, but you've already decided, well, I've committed to this, and this decision is very clearly one way or the other.
Can you give us some examples of homeowners' values and what that looks like?
Yeah. So many people have, really want a strong connection with their environment outside their home, the landscape and things like that. And, that's something that you want to put in the design process so that there's, those visual connections, sensory connections with the outside environment, but also their lifestyle as well. How often people go outside, how often people eat outside. That's one that I can think of. And another one is, connections within their own family unit. How do we create those moments for connection? How do we make life easier so those times for connection are longer and richer without the hassle of having things that are dysfunctional?
They're great examples. I can think of our house where I know that we have two lounge or living areas. One is connected to the kitchen and then one is not. And for us, the lounge area that's connected to the kitchen has no technology in it. Because for us, our value is, well, the kitchen is the hearth of the home. And to help with that, then we have no devices in there and it's all about connecting with each other.
Mm. Yeah. And see something, like that in terms of having no devices in that space, that's something that when a client comes to you with that kind of value, that's very tangible in terms of a design process of, what kind of things you need in that space. Okay, if you're not having devices in there, then that reduces the amount of, electrical outlets and a very down to the minute detail.
Oh, wow. And that's only something with your knowledge that you would know about, because I would not even think about PowerPoints and Windows and the layout of the space.
Yeah. And, it's something like that, if you put that into the context of your home, having a beautiful, clean wall with absolutely no, details of sockets and things like that, that's a gorgeous space to inhabit. That's a beautiful place to be. It's calming, it's serene. So all of those little details that are attached to your values actually have a big impact on your well-being and your environment and how you experience the space.
I would imagine that homeowners who come to you already have a really strong lean towards living more sustainably.
Yes, absolutely. They're already on the train.
Which,
or should I say, should I say, e-car, electric vehicle?
Oh, well, the train is really good. Public transport is really good, or even the bus. They're already on the bus. All of those analogies are really good. How does that impact upon your job?
It's honestly, it's a real joy to have, homeowners and clients approach me with, a new technology that I've not heard of, or a new material that's, light years ahead of what we're currently using. So that part is an amazing, I'm always so grateful that I have as much to learn from homeowners and other professionals in the team that I can give people as well. So that's really, a really fun and rewarding part of the process.
I imagine also that when people come to you with their home designs or what they think is a possibility that once you sit down and start having this discussion with them, about their values, and that just no doubt comes out in conversation, but what their needs and wants are, and then how that actually fits into a home design that is functional, works for them and also works for you as the architect.
Yes. And I think that was a big one. That was a big challenge when I first, started this, was seeing a real disparity between wants and needs, and setting up realistic expectations from the get-go, that not having a lot of experience or understanding of the process or how much things cost, it's so easy to, have expectations that aren't, I guess, in line with reality. And that's not necessarily because someone's greedy or wants more than they can afford, but it's about not having education in that area. And so a big part of what we do is, really breaking down that process of what's involved and how homeowners can actually, give their energy input into the project and enjoy the process rather than it being a cumbersome, stressful process.
It sounds very collaborative.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. Well, from my perspective, I think that when everyone on the team is working toward that shared common goal, it makes it really satisfying when you get there in the end, but also throughout the process, it's much easier to navigate those challenging moments because everybody's focused on getting a try at the end of the field and not on whoever's playing around in the defense. So it makes it a really a much more streamlined process and helps to take a little bit of emotion out as well.
Because homeowners come with a lot of emotion. It's their home. It's their commitment.
Yes, and fairly so. It's a huge economic investment, probably the biggest one we ever make. Not only that, it's a big chunk of time as well. It's often years from start to finish, and not only clients, but also professionals, consultants, contractors. People are proud of the things that they have and their craftsmanship, and so yeah, it can sometimes it can be challenging when someone's potentially questioning how something looks or if it doesn't meet an expectation. But if you're able to step away from that emotion and actually focus on how it doesn't meet the expectation, then everybody's focused on how to reach the solution rather than what someone said about them.
You were saying before about financial investment, the economic investment to do a reno or a rebuild. When you look at a pie chart, where does architectural or home design sit as a percentage ratio compared to the amount of spend you spend on that, compared to your long-term investment for sustainability, compared to the actual materials and the house build?
Oh, that's a great question. I can answer. I can answer it partly. So when we're looking at the cost of a build, now that's just the build only. An architectural, a designer is somewhere around sort of 5% of that cost of build. So, which is a pretty small amount when you look at that in relation to, other parts of the process, like your structural elements or cladding materials, it's quite small. In terms of the long-term benefits or payoffs, I would love to know the answer to this question. Certainly what I can say in terms of financially, I couldn't tell you, the payoffs or returns, but experientially and qualitatively, when you live in a home that's designed with your needs in mind and, it helps you to function well throughout your life, not just for now, but in, 10, 30, 50 years. I guess that's why it's so hard to measure. But those things have great returns. And we see that, when architecturally designed homes go for resale, they retain their value really well because, not only, I guess, sometimes they may have finishes and materials that might be sort of higher end, but more so it's about the experience of being in them. They feel nice, they're nice to be in, you're comfortable.
So would you say that it's those kind of elements that are the most impactful for a sustainable home design?
The projects that I work with are for long-term use. I don't want to be a designer who designs homes that are only going to be used for 5 years. I don't want to be a designer who designs a home that's only going to be used for 20 years before it's knocked down. That doesn't fulfill my values as an architect. But more broadly, it doesn't solve this big problem that we have of having, sustainable homes that are multi-generational and available for multi-generations.
Has a homeowner ever come to you and said, look, we'd really like this. You've had a really big think about it. It's probably gone differently with your ethical decisions, where you know that if they did a different option, you know that they would love it a lot more. Have you ever got to that point where you've said to the homeowner, look, I really value this because I think that you're going to value it, and then it happens and then they absolutely love an idea that you had that they had never thought of?
Yes, that has happened a couple of times, and particularly, so I design with hemp as one of the materials, and that's something that I've actually suggested to a couple of homeowners, and that's been a really surprisingly well received element for a lot of people, and it's really encouraging to see that hemp has sort of gone past the, I don't know, sort of jokey, is this a joke kind of phase, into this is a real world solution. And now people are adopting this and taking this on board. So that's been one that's been really exciting as a designer, to see people, take that up really enthusiastically.
It's a very particular building material, isn't it? And I know that at Shepherd's Ground, hemp has been used in a number of the houses there.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful to see different iterations at Shepherd's Ground. I think there's around 30 homes there, and at least 8 of those homes are out of hemp. And they range in size as well as construction methods. So some of them are more traditional in terms of putting a timber frame with shoring on either side and pouring hemp in, and others have been more modern where they've actually sprayed it in. So, and different effects at the end, where some of them have been completely rendered inside and out with a lime render, and others where they've had lime render on the outside but left the hemp exposed inside. And it gives you a really beautiful examples of how one material can be treated in so many ways and have a completely different experience inside those homes.
And I've visited Shepherd's Ground, and actually I've interviewed Sally from Shepherd's Ground in a previous episode that you can go back and listen to. And it is fascinating to go and see something like that when, for example, I've only ever been surrounded by like gyprock based homes.
Yes, it's a completely different feeling. It's super cozy and welcoming and comfortable, and the acoustics are really beautiful. You're never shouting. It's a really gorgeous space to be in.
But I also feel like any materials that are deemed as sustainable, sustainability also comes with availability of the product, and we don't ever want to exhaust hemp as a product, or the availability might not be as local as what you think it is. There's always some challenges with that.
Yes, most certainly. And certainly, the hemp industry in Australia has grown a lot in the last 5 years. But one of the things that I try to get my clients to consider is, how many kilometres each one of your materials is doing before it gets to your site. We know that the construction industry accounts for something like 30% of emissions in Australia. And of those emissions, the manufacture of steel, concrete, and aluminium makes about 70% of that. And then transport is the next biggest contributor to the construction industry's emissions. So, all of these materials that we find overseas that maybe, cost less, by the time we get them to site, the emissions cost is actually much higher than a product that we may buy for more money in Australia. So these are things that every project has a different set of constraints, and what works for one homeowner doesn't work for the next. And that's all about, being truly eco-efficient is about looking at that holistic picture and saying, okay, this does work for me, but this doesn't. And I'm okay with the fact that, this is not as a sustainable choice, but it's one that actually for me is financially sustainable.
It sounds like hemp is one of those finishes or, construction materials that you'd always recommend. Are there other sustainable materials that you would recommend that also help stop people with the greenwashing of knowing what is sustainable and what isn't sustainable?
That is really tricky, isn't it? And I think, we mentioned it before that one thing that often makes a difference is the emotion that homeowners will attach to something. Something like I've had a client that wanted to use solar roof tiles, which, is still a really new technology in Australia. And so the price is really high. But for them, that was a really important part of their sustainability journey, to be able to have a demonstration, a working project of something that was using these new technologies, so that other people could then, adopt it. So that emotion that you have that is attached to whatever that feature is that something that is really important to you? And that's where we revisit those values. Is it a core part of what you value, or is it something that's, a little bit shiny, that's sort of pulling you away from those values? And that's can be confronting when homeowners actually have to face those decisions.
There you go. That is something that I wouldn't have even considered. As you said, with the solar tiles, they are relatively new technology in Australia. And, people are still have a delay on uptake of solar panels, let alone solar tiles.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I would love to see those tiles in action. I think, like anyone, what an amazing opportunity to see technology do its thing.
How do you work with homeowners who are concerned about sustainability, would like to have their house be more sustainable, but they are worried about the additional costs that living sustainably you can face?
Yeah, I guess the beauty, I think, of sustainability is that every effort made is not for nothing. It doesn't matter whether you have a basically non-existent budget to, how long is a piece of string. Everything that you do that counts towards sustainability matters. And whether you're renting, whether you don't have the opportunity to renovate, there's still so many possibilities to actually increase and improve sustainability that's not a huge cost burden. That might be something that I talk about, pillars in terms of a project of cost, quality, quantity, and time. So when you pull one of those levers, it affects the others. So something that might not cost you a lot of money may take a lot of time. And, these things are when sustainability is important to you, those levers also become really important, because cost for some sustainability features may be inhibitive, but for others, absolutely acceptable.
You're an architect that loves doing renovations and would prefer to do that rather than an entire new build. How did you get to that point?
Renovations are usually more challenging design-wise. You're working with existing constraints, a site that already has potential challenges, and within, walls and structure that's been there. But it's really satisfying transforming something that wasn't, meeting someone's needs into something that does, but while retaining some features, that people love about their home. There's no need or reason to discredit the things that we've done in the past. But what we can do is add to them, make them more functional, change them so that they are more sustainable. And so in the chain of reducing waste, renovation provides so many opportunities to reduce, reuse, recycle. And that little bit of an added challenge of not having a blank slate is something that, for me as a designer, is that extra satisfying bit.
Yeah, I love the sound of that, because I can see where you're coming from now, is that it is more challenging, that you have to work with what's already there. And then you've got this beautiful renovation that is more suitable and more functional for the homeowner. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about renovating sustainably?
Probably one that comes up time and time again is that, the process is quite quick. And I think probably what is a bit of a misconception is that, it's a similar process as to your average build, which in terms of construction, it's very similar, almost the same. But I guess what's different is that the time spent in design, the time spent documenting, the time spent researching, finding an alternative can be much longer than your average traditional build. And it also means sometimes, thinking laterally, thinking outside the box. And certainly, as with any project, it's not without compromise. And I think that, if you come to it with a really strong set of values and a really strong idea of what you want out of it at the end, then those compromises tend to look more like design challenges rather than you're losing out on something.
Have you got some really lovely short stories of the closed loop of design, build, and happy homeowners, where homeowners have come back to you to say, this is an amazing reno, thank you?
Yes, actually, I do. So there's a lovely project that was the original home is over 100 years old, so a beautiful timber, stunning farmhouse. And at the back of it was a really 80s addition, which wasn't functioning, and it was taking away from the beautiful old farmhouse. Was sort of almost unusable, and so we sort of tossed up whether to pull the 80s extension off completely and start again, and it wasn't possible to do that because of some planning rules. So we were left with working with what was there, the external shell of that 80s extension. And so we, going through the design process, looking at the spaces that were really important to the family, what spaces were already really well captured in the original farmhouse, and what could these additional spaces, give them. And the result is beautiful craftsmanship, wonderful materials, but more importantly, home spaces or spaces that really enabled their growing family to have, I guess, a bit more modern functionality, but more connection, richer connection of, having spaces blend together rather than, the traditional sort of farmhouse where separate rooms, and being able to blend the parts of their houses together. And bonus, in sustainability was that they were better able to separate the old from new. So, heating and cooling improved. And so, yeah, that was a really rewarding feedback to get.
That's really lovely. And to hear that how important people are in this sustainability journey of home design, in addition to the structure of a home and how you can work around that. And it sounds like you're marrying those two very, very well.
Look, it's an ever pull and push kind of process, but that's, I think, one of the things that makes it exciting. When a new client comes to you, it's the potential for possibility of not only, I guess, changing their lives, but also how can they change my life? How can they change my experience and perspective and design?
Yeah, home design is really interesting because there are many McMansion home design builders where it's straight off the plan, where those particular builders, they plan a home design and then it's up to the client to choose whether that home is suitable for the orientation and the direction. And it feels like with some properties that it's just like the house is just plonked onto that block of land with no consideration of anything at all.
Yeah, it's a real shame, and it's certainly a big contribution to how you operate and maintain and manage the comfort within the home by simply using passive solar design or orientating so that you're taking advantage of the sun and the weather patterns. It makes a huge difference to how you feel inside the home.
Yeah. I mean, we bought our home as a home. We didn't design our home. And, we've often said that if they'd only just, when they built the home, if they'd only just like tilted it this way a little bit more, we'd have a slightly better orientation for out the front. Or if the garage wasn't plonked right on the north facing side of the home, then that would be even better.
Yeah, and those things, it also, you mentioned about, whether a window was placed correctly, and that's a missed opportunity for a view, to a connection outside, to, the tree across the street.
Yep, home design is extremely important. And also, it's when you were saying about that 5% roughly of the ratio of an architect design, at the time, the actual cost feels like a lot for an architect, to design your home. But 5% in the term of the cost of the build and the longevity of the home is not much at all for an architect to get it right from the beginning.
Yes, and I think probably, it feels like a lot upfront because, you're paying someone potentially without having planning approval yet, so you don't even know whether this thing is going to get built. But what that person is doing is actually designing the home for you that you are going to eventually build. And I think a common misconception is that when you have an architect or a designer on board, that means that everything's going to be more expensive because they're going to specify more expensive tiles or, high-end taps. And that's simply not the case. That's totally directed by the homeowner, by the client. And, certainly I'm sure any architect would love a budget that has no ends to specify whatever they want. But that's not the reality that's happening in, the 5% of homes that are actually coming onto the market that are designed by, a designer or architect. They're not all high-end, high-budget. The work is simply for, mums and dads and people who are on the edge of retiring. So it's the architect is working for the homeowner, not the other way around.
Thank you, Natalie, for your time today. It's provided a huge insight into things to consider when renovating your home. And even if you're not at that stage of renovating, but you're looking at your home a little bit differently, I hope that spurs you into thinking about how you utilize your home, how your home functions, and is it at the best capacity it is. I really liked how Natalie said that doing what you can makes a big difference when it comes to living more sustainably. So thank you so much for your time, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Mardi.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the ReNewy Living Podcast. I hope you're feeling more confident about taking a localised and actionable approach to living sustainably. If this episode has inspired you to take simple action, please follow the ReNewy Living Podcast so you can catch every episode. We'd love it if you could share this episode with your friends. It's a great way to spread the word and help more people join the conversation about living sustainably. You can even send me an email with the episode that really made it for you. Hearing your positive actions for change helps me understand how these stories work within our shared communities. Head over to my website, renewyliving.com.au, for the show notes and blog posts from this episode. I look forward to sharing more stories from the people of Newcastle as we delve into our community's diverse social and environmental practices for positive planetary change from a localised perspective.